welcome back to In With the New and XFL podcast. We are here for version 2 of the quarantine specials. Me and Jordan here, all about talking about some kind of speculations of the season, right? You know, the season, of course, ended in a dramatic fashion with the whole virus, but I think we're going to go through today and talk about what would have been, what would have maybe happened if the season didn't end, and kind of our fun speculative ways of just thinking over in our heads while we have no sports going on, of just basically what's going on. So Jordan,
Just predictions, I
yeah
think that's mainly, I think, what a lot of people are doing with any league right now is
yeah
like, yeah, maybe this would have happened, just kind of giving our own personal insight on what we think could have happened. For us, we saw half the season, so we got a pretty good chunk of, where the trends were meeting and aligning. So yeah, just some predictions in terms of where teams placed in their divisions. And then also we want to give a brief overview of playoffs.
yeah
It's not too complicated for the XFL. Just a reminder, how it is obviously there's 4 teams for each division, and the top 2 teams from each division play in the semifinals, and the winner of those 2 games go on to play each other in the championship. So it's only 3 playoff games, so it's not terribly
super
difficult.
simple. So
Yeah.
and I think we were doing a week by week podcast earlier talking about the games, and
Mm-hmm.
now we're just kind of speculating. So I think we've got some good ideas of what's going to be going on and what we think is going to happen, or what could have happened. So do you want to
Sure.
kick us off?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick us off. I was thinking we could just start with the East.
Okay.
The East, when the season ended, was in complete shambles. We had no idea what was
Yeah.
happening because there was 3 teams that all had the same record of 3-2. So we were all just trying to figure out who was the decisive winner in that division. Was it St. Louis? Was it New York? Or was it DC? They all kind of had their moments. So for me, I just kind of stuck with who I thought was the most consistent team in that division, and it was the Battlehawks.
Yeah.
For me, I would have them as number 1. I stated that they would have a 7-3 record, so that they would go on a pretty good streak at the end of a 4-1 stretch. And I looked at the schedule, and it wasn't difficult for the Battlehawks. They had to face the Vipers twice, which, I mean, even though you give credit to the Vipers for having, the end of the season kind of going on a nice little run there, I think the Battlehawks could have conquered the Vipers twice in the remaining games. And they also avoided the Roughnecks, which was the team that no one could beat. So I think that their schedule, when looking at every other team's, was the easiest. And so that kind of led me to believe for them to jump and to make that push as the best team in the East and escape with that division.
Yeah, I think for me with the best team, I like the idea of the Battlehawks, especially because you're talking about a solid team, solid defense playing that they were, and the whole idea that they were playing consistent. But I like to throw in there, I like the way the New York Guardians were playing at the end of the season. They started off strong with that first game that hosted a shutout. But then they, of course, the whole Matt McGloin shamble thing that was just going on. And so once they decided, of course, like we were talking about earlier, our favorite guy, Luis Perez, once they decided to put him in, it really felt like the Guardians were just found their niche, found their identity a little bit. And they all kind of like rode off the coattails of Perez. And that whole thing just seemed like it was booming. I felt like they were going to be starting to peak at the right time. But due to the season ending, it just, who knows what would have happened. But I feel like that team was supposed to just start doing really well. And I think that they, you would have seen them in the end there kind of battle it out with the Battlehawks and also with the defenders. We didn't really talk about the defenders. And I think especially when it's important to talk about them because the whole downfall of Cardell Jones. Yeah. Thanks for reminding me. The whole downfall of Cardell Jones was like insane. You're looking at probably the best player in the whole league in the beginning of the season. And then all of a sudden he just decided to go on a terrible stretch of games and end up getting pulled. And you wondered if they would make that comeback and you wondered if they would get better. But for me, it was definitely, I think the Guardians were kind of my favorites tailing off when the season did end.
Yeah. Did you have like a record that you might have given them, maybe like a 6-4?
Yeah, I think 6-4 would have been a good record because they already had. How many losses did they have before that?
They had 2. It was
They had
3-2 was their record.
So I think it would have been would have
finish the
been
season again with that
maybe
same
they
record.
could have maybe pushed to 7-3, but 6-4 would have been probably a pretty generous or reasonable record to give them.
Prediction. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the Guardians because, again, yeah, we talked about it. At one point, it seemed like they were the worst team in the league, and then they kind of made that push with Luis
Yeah.
Perez finally getting his start. So although I don't put them at the top of the East, I would put the Guardians second over
Yeah.
the Defenders to make the playoffs.
It would have been that
And
semifinal game probably, right?
yes, that's what I would have picked for
Yeah.
sure in the East. And I think obviously a lot of the reason for that is because they were starting to gel.
Mhm.
All that drama that kind of took their season, after that first week and took kind of like some sort of period where there was a lot of tension was starting to dissolve, and they were starting to become, their own team, their own football team. They went on a 2-game win streak at the end. The only reason I have them at 5-5, which isn't a great record, is because they would have had to finish the season or finish the remainder of the season with games against the Battlehawks and the Roughnecks.
Yeah.
My teams are the two teams that I think are the best in the league. But they would have ended the season if you look at their schedule with games against the Defenders and Vipers. And I think it would have been a really cool story and something that would have ended up happening to see the Guardians be down 3-5 and or like 3 wins, 5 losses in standings, and they would have to win those 2 last games to make their push into the playoffs. And I think they would have done it. And I
Mhm.
think that would have been a good story to see them,
Yeah.
get in the playoffs in that dramatic fashion. So Guardians 5-5 for me. I have them making the playoffs as the second best team in the East.
Nice. So,
Yeah.
do you want to move on into the West?
Well, I was just gonna end up like, so for you, you picked the Guardians. Would you pick the Battlehawks or the Defenders to finish second in the East?
Oh, yeah, I was already saying the definitely the Battlehawks.
The Battlehawks. Okay.
I don't think they started off strong, the DC Defenders, but it definitely seemed like at the end there it was the Battlehawks, kind of
Mm-hmm.
like you said, the consistency was key there for them in that running game. The two-headed that running back was like Matt Jones was just doing an amazing job. So
Yeah.
um, I think definitely like I always like to say is defense and a good running game. It's really hard to beat those two things. So
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, for the Defenders, if I had to finish the season, I'd say 5-5 for them as well, which is kind of surprising.
yeah,
But there was a lot of moments where the Defenders looked like they were one of the best teams in the XFL, especially at the beginning. But I think you're right in terms of Cardell Jones struggling the way that he did, and them having to go to that QB shift would have taken away a lot of momentum. It would have been hard for them to find wins
hmm
near the end of the season. And I think really that lost the Guardians in the final 2 weeks would have pushed them out of playoff contention. So I have them out. And then the Vipers, God bless them. We talked about them throughout. They were the laughing stock of the league. And then all of a sudden they went from a team that was consistently a tough win to get against. But I think realistically, while they were still mathematically in the playoffs, they just didn't really have a shot. I think there was too many other teams trying to fight for playoff position, and I think they would have just kind of fallen under the pile, and they wouldn't have
yeah.
been able to claw their way out of it. So I had them at 3-7, respectively. Before they were 1-4 when the season ended. So, finish off 2-3
Yeah.
record. I guess that's
Imagine
something.
Matt, like we were talking about earlier, they were it seemed like every team was like starting to peak right when the season ended. It seemed like they were all kind of finding their niche, finding their edge, except for the Defenders, of course, they were
Yeah,
not finding it. But the other teams were starting to find this rhythm and find this like identity. And I think it was super interesting to see like what if the Vipers could have all of a sudden pulled out a bunch of wins and shocked the
yeah,
league or something like that. You see teams start clicking because it's such like a you think you have a handle on what's going on in the game, but then it seemed like every week it kept proving us that no, you don't know what's going on,
hmm
and it seems like every team is really up for like who's going to win. I don't know, we'll see, but it's definitely going to be it would have definitely been interesting to see like if the Vipers could have come out and just said like, oh, now they're playing good football, and who knows what would have happened there.
yeah. I mean, they deserve credit because yeah,
Yeah,
as we mentioned at the end, they really held their own against some really good teams. They had a good game against the Roughnecks,
yeah,
a great game against the Wildcats, where they were scoring a lot of points. And the offense was obviously the initial struggle for them at the beginning, but they finally kind of found their rhythm. I just think they would have fallen under the big pile of teams that were really trying to find their way into the playoffs. So
Yeah.
Respect to them. I think maybe if the XFL returns, which I think we're all anticipating it to for a second season, I think the team that can make the highest leap is Tampa. I really do. I think they
Hmm.
have the talent. And if the offense can stay consistent, I think they could be one of the better teams in the XFL for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can go ahead and move on to the West
All
now.
right.
The big team, we all talk about it. It seems like it's almost a cliche at this point that we're talking about the Roughnecks as much as we are, but
Hmm.
you can't deny the fact that they were 5-0 and they were clearly the best team in the league when it came to an end. So it left me thinking, could potentially the Roughnecks finish with an undefeated season? Could they finish 10-0?
Could they?
And um, you know what? When I wrote down my predictions, I thought about it long and hard, and I just went out on a limb and said, "Yeah, I think they would have done it." And I think the reason why I have that belief is I just think the story is so, so, so awesome to think this is an organization that's having their first professional football league, and for them to finish with a perfect 10-0 record, I mean, that would have just been an absolute, unbelievable thing to witness. And not to mention, talent wise, they're the best in the XFL by far. Quarterback wise, receiver wise, defensive wise, they're the best. The stars aligned for that perfect season, and they just answered the call consistently throughout. So I
Yeah.
would have had them at 10-0, which I think would have been an awesome thing to see.
I was close. I didn't go quite 10-0 though. I went with
Okay.
them losing to that week 7 matchup, I believe it was, against that we were all really excited about. Or was it week 7? I can't remember exactly what week it was, but when they were going to play the New York Guardians. And
Okay.
I
Yeah.
felt like that could have been a game where they might have been lulled to sleep a little bit. They're from all that victory and all those wins they had, for a team like the Guardians who are starting to play hot, with a great defense. They have a
Hmm.
solid defense, and one of their players got picked up, was the leading sack guy in the XFL. And then, of course, like we said, Luis Perez and that offense was starting to click. And I think that they could have given the Roughnecks run for their money, I think. So I had them losing to them, but I still had them as the top team in the West and the team that was going to move forward and play in the championship.
Yeah, I mean that's totally fair, and I think you're right in terms of the remaining games in their schedule. That one against the Guardians, and maybe that one they were playing another game against the Wildcats. I think maybe that could have been a game that
Yeah.
really, could have turned some heads. But
So is that your
I
team
don't
who's
know.
second place there, the Wildcats?
Okay, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it because yes, and the Wildcats would be my second team. I actually had them at a 6-4 record, which would have had them end the season with a 4-1 run. So I think, obviously we talked about it throughout the beginning of the season is that they were the most inconsistent team in the league because there were some days where they look like, oh wow, this offense is catching fire. They have a lot of great names on that roster, and defensively they struggled against the pass, but they had some great moments, especially turnover differential was fantastic for them all year.
Yeah.
So, I think they would finally maybe get past that, that bump and they would get over it and then they would start to play consistent football. And it was all relying on the quarterback, Josh Johnson. There was a lot of games where he really struggled to get consistent passes and to kind of command a game. But there was also games where it looked like, as we mentioned before, he would go out there and just have a good time, have fun, play the game that he loved, and he would excel in that position. And I think he maybe would have made that transition, in the final few weeks of the season. I would have loved to see it. I think probably, obviously, the Roughnecks, in terms of the season ending, it hurts the Roughnecks the most because they had a chance for an historic first start. But the Wildcats is probably second on that list because I think they were starting to finally make that transition to a legitimate, consistent football club. So,
Yeah.
but again, if the season ended, I would have had them as the second best in the West for sure.
Nice. Yeah. I think yeah, for me it was tough to decide between the Wildcats and the Renegades for that second spot. The Renegades, I'll just go with them since you went with the Wildcats.
Okay.
Even though I got the Wildcats hat on, so
Yeah,
go
I
Wildcats.
love
But
the consistency. You've had it on this whole time. I
got
love
to
it
just every time. It's the
every
only.
time.
But I'll go with the Renegades because
Okay.
they were always like sneaky good, right? They didn't flash. They weren't amazing, but they had a lot of names. They're coming with a lot of hype, and with Dunbar and
Yeah.
with the uh, Landry Jones at QB, they were always
Artist Payne
very
at back.
sneaky.
Yeah.
Artist Payne, yeah, I couldn't. Yeah, those guys were always very sneaky, and they kind of crept up on you. Like, oh, I didn't realize Landry Jones threw for 400 yards, even though he threw a
Mhm.
couple interceptions and looked kind of off there at the end. And I think that's where I kind of was maybe upping the Wildcats into be that better spot.
Yeah.
But if that offense were to click in that end, if Landry Jones could just hold on to the football and not throw it away or throw it into the defensive hands so many times,
Mhm.
that they become a really good team very quickly. Just for them was a matter of turnovers, and that literally was the only thing that was wrong with them. Like if they can somehow not turn over the ball so many times, they're going to win games. And so I think, especially with the roster they had and the good defense they were playing as well, it was definitely something that I think that they could have pushed on into the second half of the season and really kind of won a lot of games.
I find that to be an intriguing take in a way. I think for me, when I think about the Renegade season, I think it was just an absolute nightmare because, again, when we went into this, we said that was going to be the team to beat,
Yeah.
and really what happened was injuries began to happen. They couldn't really. Obviously their star player was Landry Jones, and he couldn't stay healthy throughout the entire season. That was a big problem for them. Anytime we would watch them play football, they would not run the ball enough, despite them having
Mm-hmm.
maybe the two best backs in the in the XFL. Pardon me, and they just were very inconsistent towards the run game. Their defense, they would do their best to stay in games, but offense, well, a lot of the times would kind of run it into those walls and hurdles, and they couldn't jump over them, and they couldn't score points really. They had a lot of struggle scoring points, especially when they got to the red zone. Just not a lot of touchdowns for this team this year. And it was a bummer because this is Bob Stoops. This is a guy we all expected to be the coach of the league. And I think really what it was is just unlike the Roughnecks, when the stars aligned for them, I feel like the Renegades, the stars just didn't. And I think it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
And I have them at a 4-6 record, so I have them below 500. I just think it was a disappointing season for them, and it'll be interesting to see what they do next year if the XFL returns. I'll be excited to see what they do. I think obviously they have the potential to make that push, but just this year was really really difficult for them, and I guess we'll see what happens. But I want to see if they stick with Landry Jones. I think that's going to be a really intriguing thing to focus on during the offseason. Will they decide to stick with the NFL backup that's had a lot of experience but didn't produce the way he was expected to in his first season? So we'll see how that goes. And then I think both of us ending the West, we have the Dragons. I actually have them with the worst record in the XFL with 2-8 in my predictions. Listen, it was a problem all year. They just couldn't finish football games. That's what hurt them the most. And they were near, even though they stuck with Brandon Silvers throughout the year, they were basically near a quarterback shift. I think that would have, it would have changed, it would have shifted momentum for them, even if they didn't even have momentum, but it would have found a way to even make them, the team chemistry just not be there the way it should have been. You look at the stats; they were the worst offense in football and in the XFL. They had a league low 248.6 yards per game. And then talent-wise, their roster just wasn't up to par with a lot of these teams in the West. So I have them with the 2-8 record. They were the worst, even though they had the best fans probably in the league. They didn't come out. They didn't come out hot, and I don't imagine them finishing hot, to say
Yeah.
the least.
I think that's definitely, I agree with that take right
Yeah,
there.
yeah. I mean, it is what it is.
So what about the championship? Who's we
Yeah.
got the championship game right now. You're
Okay.
saying it is the Roughnecks versus the Battlehawks. Who taking there?
Okay. So hold on. I was gonna do playoffs because
Ah,
just to set the mood, just to set the
yeah,
division matchups in the first round. There's only two rounds, but the semifinals. So both of us actually no, I would have had the Wildcats and Roughnecks, and you would have had the Renegades and Roughnecks. But either way,
yeah.
both would be in Houston.
We
So
both
Houston would
would
have had that
assume
home
that the
field
Roughnecks would
advantage.
win that game.
Yes, I think so as well. I actually, when I do the score, I had a 14-31 finish. I think
Yeah,
I think they would have found a way to just steamroll whoever they played in the West, um, especially in front of their home crowd, which was, again, another consistently good home crowd.
yeah.
So, yeah, both of us have the Roughnecks. Not a big surprise. I'm interested to hear what you say about the East because while we both have the Guardians and Battlehawks, you have the Guardians with home field advantage at MetLife. I have St. Louis at home. So I want to hear what you think would happen in that game.
Yeah, I think we talked about it earlier a little bit, and I rode I'm riding the New York Guardians here. I think that
Okay.
they're peaking at the right time, and just I've been beating the same drum. It's the Luis Perez drum, and I think his consistency and his level of play was just very eye opening and very like, oh wow, like it just seemed like they really found that connection, and so yeah, I had them winning that game, and with them with the home field advantage there in MetLife, I think they would have definitely been able to pull that out.
Okay. I mean, yeah, and I could totally see that. And I think for a game like that, home field advantage is so important.
Yeah, because then
Even
if you're
though,
like you're saying though, if the way you're going with
mhm,
Battlehawks having the home field advantage, that's a different story. That is a very very like we saw St. Louis have football back, and man, they showed that they want football back. It was a very rowdy crowd, and it was like awesome to watch.
yeah, it was a bummer that we only got to see him twice. They only had
Yeah,
2 home games once the season came to an end. They were probably the best fan base. I mean, Seattle, they showed up every time, as most Seattle fan bases
yeah,
tend to do. But I think the Battlehawks fan base definitely shocked me. The way that arena looked in all blue, it
it
was
looked
all
good.
blue, and it looked really, really cool. And yeah, I'm just a big Battlehawk guy. I thought that besides the Roughnecks, they were the most consistent team.
Hmm.
And I think that this Guardians Battlehawks matchup would have been very intriguing because I think the Guardians would have anticipated a run first offense. They would have tried their best to stop Matt Jones, who was the St. Louis top rusher, and I think maybe Jordan Tamahu, however you say it, we never can figure it out. It's over. We've given up. I think the way he could have shined in that game. I think that would have been really an awesome game to see
Yeah,
against the Guardians defense, to see what he could have done against them. And yeah, I had this as a close game. I had it 24-20. I would have picked the Battlehawks though. So
yeah,
I would have stuck with for me, the top teams in the West and the East going to the playoff or to the championship round, as would have you, because you picked the Guardians and
yeah,
Roughnecks. So yeah, so either way, for whoever we think would win the championship, both of our matchups have Houston home field advantage.
yeah.
So go on. Who would you have win the historic XFL championship, the first one of its kind? Who would you have?
I, I, you don't want to go with the mainstream, but I just can't see why you couldn't go with the mainstream here. It's
Hmm.
the PJ Walker and the fact that he got picked up by an NFL team so quickly, the way he was lighting up the field this season. He was the MVP from week one, really. And I think that this guy is just, especially with him and his receivers and the way they
Yeah,
had those connections, I think it's just like he was so good. And like it looked like he was like a step above every other player out there. The way he was juking out everybody and the way he was, the sidearm throws, he looked like a hybrid of Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson in the XFL. And that's high praise right there. And I think a lot of the teams saw that and were very scared defensively to be able to scheme against him. And although I think the New York defense is very good, it's going to be tough to be able to defend a guy like that who just there's so many threats, there's so many weapons on that team. And we talked about it last week with all the NFL talent that they had on that team with the amount of players that got picked up was like seriously surprising to see like, whoa, like they had a ton of talent on that team. And it just goes to show
yeah.
how talented that team was and really how hard it would to beat them. Like you're saying, probably 10-0, 100% baby all the way to the championship.
Yeah, so you have them going 1972 Miami Dolphins. You have them going perfect season and then ended off with the championship, which is I mean, in the NFL, that's only happened once with that team.
Yeah.
So you have first year. I mean, you don't have them going. Actually, never mind. That was a mistake by me because you had them at 9-1. My apologies.
Yeah, well, the one I mean, either way, that's
Either
a
way,
toss-up game,
yeah,
but I was just playing a little devil's advocate to your side.
for sure. Then that's totally fair. So I this is gonna. I mean, this is a shocker because I established at the beginning of the XFL season I'm a Roughnecks fan,
Yes.
strictly on off the name. I thought the name was awesome, so I was like, I'm
We're
sticking with
looking at
this team.
logos. We're
The logos
scrolling
was
through
tight.
Google, like who are the
Yes.
team? We're trying to memorize teams, trying to memorize
Hmm.
names, and he's like, that one looks cool.
Yeah. So I was like, this is gonna be my team, and I didn't even expect them. I didn't even know who PJ Walker was until the first week of the season, and I saw, okay, my team has a quarterback. I'm sticking with them. But I do not have them going 1972 Miami Dolphins. I have them going 2007 New England Patriots. I
Oof,
have them
losing the
going
championship game, huh?
perfect all the way and losing the championship game. Now, the final score for me would have been 35-32. I think it would have been a phenomenal game. And I think it would have been an offensive game, which is something that, again, was very inconsistent with the XFL. But that's the reason why we wanted to watch this league. We wanted to watch consistently good and strong offense. And I think the final matchup would have ended up having that, despite both teams having good defenses. Um, I think PJ Walker would have absolutely dominated the game. I think he would have been phenomenal. But again, I think, especially with the Battlehawks beating a Guardians team who I would have had as the third best team in the XFL in terms of talent, coming into that game against the Roughnecks, confidence would have been incredibly high. I think Houston, I mean, at that point, they wouldn't have been tired or exhausted. They would have had winning on their mind 100% because it's the championship game. But I think the Battlehawks have some sort of formula in them, especially with their running game, where they could have exposed the Roughnecks defense in some sort of way. And I think they could have, used almost PJ Walker's highest asset to their advantage with Tamayu. I think they could have found a way, to show more formations in terms of having the quarterback run the football more, which he did throughout the season. Tamayu did. So I don't know. It's kind of just like, shutting my eyes and just going for the half court shot, seeing maybe if it would happen. We don't
That's
know
all
if
we
it's ever
can
going to
do at this
happen.
point.
That's true. And that's the sad part about it. We never know
Yeah.
if it will happen or not. But I don't know. There was something in me that said it's almost too perfect of a story for the Roughnecks to go 10-0 and then win the championship with that. I think the Battlehawks would have.
Disney isn't real life, guys. It's
No,
not.
it's not.
Jordan doesn't think so. It would have
Well,
not
it
been the Cinderella story for the Houston Roughnecks in their opening season.
not the Cinderella story, but for the Battlehawks, it would have been an awesome story.
It would
Come in
have.
as the underdog to win that game and to beat an undefeated
So
team.
maybe more of a Cinderella story. So you're saying.
Maybe, maybe. But anyways, that's what I would have. I think, looking back on this and like kind of doing research for this, it's really, really heartbreaking that we didn't get to see it and unfold. I think,
Yeah.
And we started off the podcast, as you mentioned, we didn't know any players. I mean, we knew some of the NFL players that were like backups that know the name, but we didn't know a lot of the talent. We had to memorize names. We had to memorize teams. And I think we finally got to our peak. We're like, okay, we're into this. Like we're watching
Yeah.
consistently. We're doing research into this, and then it was kind of just stripped away from us because of the circumstances, which sucks. But ultimately, like it was. I think it was a great half of a season, and I think hopefully, they return with a vengeance and say, okay, we can make this second year as a league
I'll be
better.
back.
Yes, I'll
Definitely.
be back. Terminator, full Terminator. So, but that's what I got. So I have the Battlehawks champions. You have Roughnecks. We'll never know if it's true,
We'll
but
never know.
yeah, I think we had some good insight there. That
That
wasn't
was
bad.
good. Yeah, yeah. It would have been very interesting to see how that would have all played out. But yeah, I think that's today's episode,
Yep.
Jordan. Thanks for joining in on the call. We're
Yes, sir.
calling you guys from Zoom. Just took the world by storm.
Taking the
And
world by storm. How about all those great like videos of people just screwing up and they just don't know their cameras on? That's the
I feel like,
best.
yeah, a couple classes, I'm like, oh, I got the mic on, or
Yeah,
something like that.
seriously.
You're like, all right,
Got to be
well,
cautious.
thanks for watching it with the new XFL podcast. I'm your host, alongside me, the other host, me and Jordan here, guys, and we're gonna end this one. And be sure to stay tuned week in, week out. We'll still be speculating on what could have been and maybe what's gonna happen in the future with the XFL. All right, see you guys.
Yeah.